narrative, there is a sort of different levels of the story. So we do have a kind of framing story. So you have to read the author's note in order to get the framing story. But this is kind of Martel narrating, sort of writing himself into the fictional aspects of the story. So it's a bit of a metafiction in this regard. Um, and he's sort of describing where he first heard of pie during his travels through India. And he learns of Pai's very fantastic story of survival when he spent 227 days aboard a life raft. So this is when he first hears of Pi and he'll describe that meeting in the author's note. And then we get the inset story, which is the narrative that Pi, when he first actually meets Pi, who is now living in Canada. So Pi will tell his tale in first person to the author, Yann Martel, and we'll get Pi's version of events, so how he survived. And we actually get everything from his childhood in Pondicherry all the way up to his landing of the life raft after 227 days aboard on the ocean. And then the last part of the story also provides a kind of secondary story, an interrogation story. So I won't tell you any details about that, but Pies will tell us another kind of story after he's sort of interrogated by the Japanese Ministry of Transport. So there are sort of many layers of narrative, multiple stories that are told, which also kind of gives us a sense that, there are maybe more ways than one in order to understand something that happens to us. So we talked about sort of the subjective version of reality or perception of reality. So that sort of will come into play when you have multiple stories being told. And it's sort of up to us to decide or understand what is perceived as truth and what is sort of subjective or a construct, fictional construct. So it's sort of up to us as readers as well to interpret and decide for ourselves in terms of the narratives that are told throughout the novel. So in terms of genre, I think we're dealing here with a kind of magical realism. And magical realism is often used in kind of post-colonial fiction. And it's a kind of modern kind of genre where basically you have elements of a very realistic tale, and then interspersed you have these moments that seem fantastic or magical. So they'll be both involved in the telling of the story. So in this definition, magic realism is described as a kind of modern fiction in which fabulous and fantastical events are included in a narrative that otherwise maintains the reliable tone of objective, realistic report, designating a tendency of the modern novel to reach beyond the confines of realism and draw upon the energies of fable, folktale, and myth while maintaining a strong contemporary social relevance. So that's basically what we're dealing with here, where you have a story that creates a kind of realistic tone throughout. It sounds very credible, realistic, objectively real, but then at the same time, there are moments that are fantastic or fabulous or unexplainable or irrational events that also sort of happen. And there'll be elements that make us sort of question the reality of what we're reading. So it's basically a blend of both realism and fantasy. and it's a common kind of genre to deal with um, elements, or to integrate elements of folktale or myth or fable inside a text that is otherwise very realistic. So before we wrap up for today's overview of Life of Pi, I do want to just mention our author, Yann Martel. So he is a Saskatoon author, so we have a nice Saskatchewan connection here. And the sort of, he kind of writes himself into the book, which is really kind of a very neat way of setting up our narrative. So I would again tell you to read the author's note because it kind of brings everything together. And he kind of writes himself into the narrative, which is kind of a funny way of doing it, but it adds a kind of level of metafiction or writing about writing, the process of coming up with the story. So obviously Life of Pi has been hugely successful for Martel. It's gone on to be turned into a film. It came out in 2012, which you can watch on your own time. But I would say read the book. It's probably, a better version of the events and allows you to imagine them on your own. And there was a little bit of controversy when the book first came out. Some people sort of thought that it shared many similarities with a book that previously came out by a Brazilian writer who wrote about Max, or his title was Max and the Cats, and it featured, it was kind of a story about a man who was stuck on a boat with a panther. But they sort of addressed this controversy just by saying, it was maybe the seed of an idea, but obviously the two books didn't have a lot in common other than the basic premise. Um, and then in terms of the success of the story and the purpose, Martel has sort of talked about how, influential or important the writing of this book has been, and how he was sort of in search of something meaningful, and that's sort of his impetus to writing Life of Pi. So he just says, I was in need of a story, and he wanted a story that was meaningful and important. So it's something that gave his life shape, and something that was had a great impact by the end of the time that you read it, as a story, not just any story, but one that has a large impact on those that hear it. So that's sort of the promise of Pi's narrative. So I'm going to link to an interview with Yann Martel, and you can watch it in your own time or sort of watch clips of it. There's some interesting sort of aspects where he talks about religion and the importance of allegory in his writing. So you can sort of make your way through that clip as well, and get reading. So we'll be discussing the first part of the novel in our next lectures.